Search and rescue operation is ongoing in Washington, D.C. Dozens of people are feared dead after a passenger plane crashed into the Potomac River after it collided with a U.S. Army helicopter. Now, it's still in the very early hours of the morning. These are live shots from Washington, D.C. Emergency teams, more than 300 of those responders, are still searching for any survivors. 64 people on board the American Airlines flight, 3 soldiers on the Black Hawk helicopter, and we understand at least 19 bodies have been recovered. Let's show you the plane coming into land then at Reagan Washington National Airport. This was seconds before the collision. It hit the helicopter, which was on a training flight just before 9 p.m. local time. So quite a few hours since then. No survivors have been found yet. This is the first major US commercial air crash since 2009.
Morning, Steve. So just after 6 o'clock in the morning there in DC, do you know more on the ground than we've been able to ascertain here in London?
Well, it looks like the plane crashed early last night, 9 p.m, and it crashed as it was coming into the airport, as it was trying to land from Kansas. And it crashed with a military helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter. More than 300 emergency workers are now trying to find bodies and survivors on the Potomac River. Now, it's really difficult conditions. The Potomac has quite a strong current, and it's incredibly cold tonight in Washington, D.C. So it looks unlikely that there's going to be many survivors, as you say. US media reports that at least 19 bodies have been found so far. 64 people were on the plane and 3 soldiers were on the Black Hawk helicopter. President Trump has actually tweeted saying that this was a tragedy that could have been prevented, and he's already speculating about what happened last night. It looks unclear as to why the helicopter, which was on a training mission, couldn't see the plane or wasn't aware of where the plane was when it was landing. And it looks like the plane was following all of the correct regulations and was following air traffic control. So this really is a tragedy, the first US aircraft crash to happen in 17 years on US soil. And I think people here are pretty devastated in DC, waiting for their loved ones. And the people on the plane, we know, were the US figure skaters team and the Russian figure skating team. So it's a real tragedy here in Washington, DC.
It seems all the remarkable to us, Steve, tuning in from Britain, that this happened just within 2 miles of the White House, which should be the most secure airspace in the whole of the United States.
That's right. Ronald Reagan Airport, which is where this crash happened, is one of 2 airports in Washington, D.C. And the airport is very, very centrally located. It's located, as you say, just near the White House, near the Washington Monument. And there's a huge amount of military planes and helicopters that are flying in D.C. As you walk around D.C., you see lots and lots of military helicopters flying very, very low. And coming into Reagan National Airport, it's an incredibly complicated and complex landing for pilots. It's one of the most complicated airports, apparently, in the United States for pilots to land in because of all the regulations to do with the military helicopters and so on that are flying around Washington, D.C. constantly. So it was obviously a very difficult situation. But again, these regulations are in place to try and stop military helicopters, military aircraft from crashing into commercial aircraft. And it seems that last night there was a significant failure.
Why, in your assessment in this situation, might this have happened? We've got a commercial airliner here with civilian passengers on it, and then we've got a military helicopter. Who would have right of way under that situation?
Well, the passenger jet, I suppose you would say, have a right of way, although basically this is not an uncommon situation in the US where they seem to mix traffic that is under the control of the air traffic controller and traffic that is transiting the area visually. So the passenger jet, as far as I understand it, was given clearance to land, and so I doubt whether the crew were taking much notice of anybody who might have been coming at them from the side. It seems that the helicopter crew were given responsibility to separate themselves from other traffic, which, you know, is sometimes a questionable procedure.
How busy is this airport, the Ronald Reagan Airport, Terry?
Very busy, like all US airports at major cities. There is always a kind of a sense of them, you know, getting an awful lot of traffic into a small area. It's always very busy in the US. The air traffic control system has been under a bit of strain. They've been short of controllers. I'm not sure whether that would have had any impact in this case, but the temptation to try and get a lot of traffic through an area is very American, I'm afraid. And you know, I think that that perhaps there will be some questions asked about the general procedure that was involved in this case.
It was 9 p.m. local time in Washington, D.C. Obviously, that city is 5 hours behind where we are now. We'll be watching the sun coming up in the next few hours, Terry. What will be happening there now in terms of a rescue operation?
Well, I'm sure that the very first responders were, well, we know they're on the scene. The National Transportation Safety Board accident investigators would have been called immediately, and I would imagine they're probably already on the scene. What seems at first sight to have been an issue, when we look at the video that you showed earlier on, there are in fact 2 aircraft that are airborne. And I wonder if the helicopter crew were looking at the wrong one.
That's interesting. It's extraordinary to think, Terry, that this happened just 2 miles from the White House, one of the most secure spots in the entire United States.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's, you know, it is perhaps slightly controversial that you've got commercial aircraft so close to all these vital organs of the US state. But you know, because it's where it is, there is a lot of traffic. A lot of people want to go in and out of that area for the very reason that it is the capital.
We're always shocked when there is a crash like this, Terry. But how frequent are air crashes?
Well, they're not frequent at all. I mean, I always say in my book, basically, that the most dangerous part of my working day was driving to and from the airport.
Right.
As a general rule, it's an extremely safe way to travel. But obviously, when you mix different types of traffic in high-density areas, and particularly at night, where the visual clues to the pilots are definitely different to what they would be in daytime, you do increase the risk level.
Yeah, and of course, the river where the plane crashed is 8 foot deep. I mean, I know we can't project, Terry, but the temperature in the Potomac River will be so low. I mean, I'd have thought hypothermia would strike very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, tragically, I think the chances of any survivors are very, very slim. I mean, both from the point of view of the nature of the accident, and as you say, the Potomac River. I mean, we go back to the 1980s. You probably remember seeing those graphic scenes of a Palm Air crash going into the Potomac full of ice floes.